Welcome to the International CPTED Association webinar on all issues related to crime prevention through environmental design. The International CPTED Association, the ICA, is a worldwide nonprofit association for professionals, researchers, urban designers, crime prevention practitioners, and students of CPTED. Our webinar is intended to educate and extend the CPTED message into topics far and wide. This webinar is produced by the ICA. Introductory music was kindly prepared for us by a Denver-based band, Muj. My name is Matea Mihinhaj, and I'm Executive Director at the ICA. Before we start, I would like to invite you to join the ICA if you're not yet a member of our international professional organization. Also, a brief disclaimer that the views expressed in this presentation belong to our guest speakers and do not necessarily reflect the position of the ICA as an organization. I will now hand over to our president, Dr. Macarena Rao, who will moderate today's webinar to introduce the topic and today's panelists. Over to you, Macarena.
Thank you, Matea. Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this new ICA webinar. My name is Dr. Macarena Rao Vargas, and I am the president of the International CPTED Association. I will be also the moderator of this event. Today, we will talk with the USA ICA branch about a very relevant topic, that is community engagement through CPTED in times of uncertainty. I will start by introducing and welcome Mr. Gregory Saville, criminologist, urban planner, and co-founder of the International CPTED Association 25 years ago, who will also introduce our guest today. Please, Greg, continue with the presentations.
Thank you, Maca, and welcome everybody to this beginning webinar of the CPTED USA. CPTED began in the United States in the 1961-71 era, following the writing of Jane Jacobs, C. Ray Jeffrey, and Oscar Newman. In the years that followed, there was no formal national organization in the United States that could promote or advocate for the quality and the promotion of CPTED. There was a training class in Kentucky. There was some private consulting companies that call themselves national. There are some crime prevention associations across the country, but none of these are truly independent national organizations that focus on the quality of the promotion of CPTED. So since 1996, the International CPTED Association has represented that national voice in America and American CPTED, and also around the world. So CPTED USA, the group that's running this webinar, is a brand new branch formed of the ICA to focus on US issues. And this webinar is our inaugural public event. What I can tell you is that we're using this webinar as a way to reach out to our American CPTED practitioners and US-based persons who are interested in CPTED. Events over the past few years in the United States have been socially turbulent and politically charged. I think that's an obvious statement. We've never been more polarized. We in CPTED USA believe that CPTED was not created for political exclusion or oppression. It was created for the very opposite, for openness and inclusion. Now, in November of last year, the ICA ran a special exclusion webinar called Exclusion versus Inclusion in CPTED, Everyone Has a Role. I encourage you to go onto the ICA website and check out that webinar. But today's webinar is a specific look at the United States perspective, from a US perspective. So CPTED USA is a small organization. The members are in front of you today, and we're just getting started. So we're using this as our way to throw out the gauntlet to you to join us, to our American audience, to participate in this dialogue, which we think is terribly important. So please join us in the organization, and welcome to the webinar. So let's start with the four presenters, which will be Randy Atlas, Jeremy, and Renee, and myself, and each one of us are going to go in turn. We'll each talk about 5 minutes to present a case study of examples where we think CPTED was used in a very important inclusionary way, both on a top-down sort of approach and a bottom-up approach. And then at the end, we want to open this up to Q&A so folks can ask questions, and Maca will moderate that. And you can add your questions to the chat section, and we'll be able to participate. So having said that, let's get started. Renee, over to you. Don't forget to unmute Ray.
You want me to start, Greg, or Renee?
I'm sorry, it should be Randy. My apologies. Randy, you're getting started, aren't you? Randy, then Jeremy.
Yes.
So Randy, your turn.
Very good.
Hello, I am Randy Atlas and am the ICA Regional Director for the United States. I'll be speaking about community engagement and integrating CPTED into the building design process at Pompano Beach. To operationalize and implement CPTED in the built environment, the city of Pompano Beach requires a public safety plan that includes acknowledgement of CPTED in the success of a project. Without this requirement, the private sector just develops high-end housing for rich persons. The Design Review Committee, known as DRC, applies CPTED and public safety equally to all economic sectors. Poor neighborhoods typically don't have security features provided because of the additional costs.
Randy, share the screen,
Now,
please.
new housing is not being victimized just because it's low income or affordable housing. There is now equal justice in application of law enforcement and CPTED.
You missed your share screen, Randy. Could you start again? You're muted, Randy.
Unmute. Okay. All right. Sorry. Still working. Still becoming a Zoom master. All right.
Hello, I am Randy Atlas and am the ICA Regional Director for the United States. I'll be speaking about community engagement and integrating CPTED into the
Still not
building
shared the screen, Randy.
at Pompano Beach.
Um,
To operation.
I'm sorry. What, Greg?
You haven't shared the screen yet.
Oh, shoot. I thought it did. All right. God bless. Share screen. QuickTime Player. Okay. Share sound. Okay. Share. Okay. Sorry, I missed the button. Okay. Take 3. Hello, I am Randy Atlas and am the ICA Regional Director for the United States. I'll be speaking about community engagement and integrating CPTED into the building design process at Pompano Beach. To operationalize and implement CPTED in the built environment, the city of Pompano Beach requires a public safety plan that includes acknowledgement of CPTED in the success of a project. Without this requirement, the private sector just develops high-end housing for rich persons. The Design Review Committee, known as DRC, applies CPTED and public safety equally to all economic sectors. Poor neighborhoods typically don't have security features provided because of the additional costs. Now, new housing is not being victimized just because it's low income or affordable housing. There is now equal justice in application of law enforcement and CPTED design to all residents. One example is the industrial park area of Pompano Beach. It was formerly a blighted area with high crime and rundown conditions, and now being turned into a well-planned neighborhood with enhanced waterways, affordable housing, businesses, restaurants, and the potential to be a wonderful and thriving area. Pompano Beach is in South Florida and has a historic downtown district, a ocean beach promenade, numerous thriving industrial zones and commercial properties along Federal Highway, a revitalized Martin Luther King corridor, a new government center, and newly built libraries and parks throughout the city. These projects should all be recognized as important subject sites for implementing and showcasing the positive results of applying and implementing CPTED into its design and review process. The city of Pompano Beach has a trained, certified, appointed reviewer for all new developments being submitted in the city. It is the job of the reviewer to determine the level of security measures that are needed on a case-by-case basis. The reviewer then reviews the plans to ensure that adequate safety, security, and CPTED measures have been included in the design. If the design lacks sufficient CPTED strategies, the reviewer would then work with the designer to incorporate appropriate design elements. The DRC acts as a CPTED committee with participation by a dozen or so members of its city government agencies. The city of Pompano Beach also conducted a certified CPTED class to educate representatives from all of the city departments and agencies. The Design Review Committee for the city has a form that is required to be completed and complies with by all the professions. What is new and different is that public safety and CPTED features are now being considered. The form outright calls for a certified CPTED professional to be consulted to develop the public safety plan for the architect and/or developer. The checklist asks that the critical CPTED elements be shown on the plans and within a written supporting narrative. The supporting report is supposed to include a risk assessment, crime analysis, and delineate the design and operational and technological features that will make the property safer and resistant to opportunistic crime. This is not the typical security CPTED checklist, but rather a reminder to demonstrate the tools needed to show that clear intention to design for with analysis, diagnosis, and participation by the local neighborhood and key resource persons. Here is an example of a public safety plan submitted to the city for their review and approval. It identifies all the required CPTED elements, including access control, circulation patterns for residents and visitors and vehicles, lines of sight, areas needing video surveillance, boundary definition, and shows graphically and in written form the intentions of the architect and developer to provide a safe and secure, affordable rental housing property. The city also created CPTED and Security Guidelines Manual. This manual identifies the principles of CPTED and security design and explains how the techniques of both can be implemented to make all development safer and more secure and more crime resistant and less burdensome on the criminal justice system. With the addition of these design guidelines came a revision of the zoning code. Wording has been inserted in the review guidelines for site plans, building design, and landscaping. Each section includes a guideline that says that all proposed design should include the core components of CPTED and security principles. The city is ensuring that every plan that gets approved will promote a safe and secure atmosphere and have a positive impact on the city's form. What is welcomed as necessary and desired security by some is reviled by others as Orwellian and oppressive control of the built environment. City planners have decided that the needs of the residents to have basic security and CPTED features create a more usable, livable, and attractive environment and improves the quality of life for all of its residents. Thank you. Thank you very much. And now I believe, Jeremy, you're next.
Yes, thank you, Randy. I appreciate that.
Let me unshare here. Give me a second.
Okay.
Hold on. Okay, hold on. I'm looking for the button to unshare. Where is it?
Should be in your toolbar there.
Oh, hold on. Goodness gracious, come on.
I think it's on top, whatever, Randy. Isn't it right next to the green bar? Isn't it right? You see a little red, stop sharing.
Should be near the top.
Unmute my video. I'm looking for it, but I'm at a loss at the moment. Ah, there it was, tucked in behind, sorry. Okay, resume share. No, sharing is paused. Okay, I think I stopped the share, yes?
Still
Nope.
showing.
Okay, stop share. Ah, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Randy. Let's see here. I'll make sure I got my notes here. All right. Well, thank you, Randy. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Jeremy Rear, and we're going to be sharing with you a story about a community coming together to build a new school. As architects, one of the most compelling ways we engage with communities is having small, deliberate conversations with people through the act of storytelling. One of our most successful engagement experiences involved a recent completed elementary school replacement in Tacoma, Washington, USA. And Washington is up there in the upper northwest corner of the United States. Arlington Elementary is a neighborhood school tucked into a tight-knit community of South Tacoma. The previous school was an L-shaped building with a courtyard for outdoor play, and also flanked by a series of portable classrooms on the west. The school and neighborhood's main concern was the old school was a lack of safety and support for play and family gatherings once held on the school grounds. The school's unsecured courtyard was plagued with illicit activities such as drug dealing and vandalism. The windows looking into the courtyard were replaced at one time with fiberglass panels that provided some degree of solar control for the classrooms, but removed visual access into the courtyard. The portable classrooms created dark, concealed spaces that could not be easily observed. This contributed to the students feeling vulnerable and safe and led to higher absenteeism. To become more familiar with the cultural fabric of the neighborhood, the school and design team began a series of smaller conversations with students and community members to find out how they might envision a new school. Access to community members was challenging, so the school principal assisted with outreach to get greater participation. The school provided a safe place where the parents and neighbors could interact with each other and the design team through a flexible schedule that was convenient for them. These smaller personal encounters were departures from more typical and formal visioning sessions hosted in larger public settings. Engaging with people one-on-one allowed more open, personal, and honest conversations about their concerns and experiences. Here are some of the stories we heard. Getting kids to school was a challenge. The school was known for the criminal behavior occurring on campus, and kids didn't want to go to school fearing activity taking place there. Access to food is a major part of supporting the neighborhood families. The school serves breakfast every morning, as well as providing free and reduced lunch. Students typically arrive to school at the Commons in the morning before classes start, where these meals were served. Our discovery was that the new school needed a place for families to come and be with their children during meal times. Thus, the school becomes a very important part of family gathering while celebrating healthy nutrition. A unique routine occurs each morning at the school where the students gather to recite a powerful statement by Rita Pearson. Continuing this tradition, that quote, and 55 aspirational words that complete the statement, I am, are located around the new school to reinforce every student's self-esteem. Before the portables were built, families would use the landscaped areas to host picnic gatherings and play basketball. Converting the landscaped areas with portable classrooms provided the necessary teaching spaces, but unintentionally replaced the community building activities with obscure areas for illegal activity. The new school provides a sense of safety through the use of secured courtyards for school activities and a welcoming, observable landscape for outdoor community gatherings and play. With the stories we heard and the community commitment to envision a more sustainable learning environment and livable neighborhood center, the resulting new school is a place where core learning can flourish, healthy food and nutrition is provided to the community, neighbors and students can easily access information, that there is a constant connection to nature, and students and community feel safe and secure. We have found through this experience that most of the time people just want to be heard and share their personal stories. Community members were excited and eager to give details about the history of the neighborhood and how their intimate connections with the school created memorable opportunities to envision a new place of learning. Thank you. And on to you, Greg. Okay, thank you, Jeremy, for that. And so you heard from Randy about an example of kind of macro CPTED where a city is actually trying to help folks in poor and impoverished areas to include them in safety strategies. And you heard from Jeremy about how that takes place from the perspective of a school. What I want to do is I want to tell you a little different story. This is kind of a, I guess you could call it a more bottom-up story. And it's an example of a project we did some time ago where we were trying to get residents in a community to participate and get engaged in the city of Philadelphia. And what we did was we ended up creating what's called today Safe Growth. And the title of this is Safe Growth, CPTED as if People Matter, taken from a number of other books years ago about the role of people in this. And so what we did was we took the concept of CPTED and we embedded it into a 4-step process. And you'll notice here at the top of the process, the most important part is the activation, getting people to work together to co-create their own plans as a group, not being opposed upon them, to them, or for them, but working with them. So the activation strategy was key for us. And then the next piece was social programming. That was CPTED was what's called second generation CPTED, or social programming in CPTED, that ties into the physical environment, but which deals with social issues in schools, in neighborhoods, with homeless, with alcohol abuse, and so forth. So kind of a more social, but a targeted social strategy. And then came the CPTED that people think of from traditionally back in the 70s and 80s, which is first generation CPTED, physical CPTED, the access controls, and all those things. So those followed a 2-step process prior to that. And then finally, to leave the community with something that they could continue to do this on their own, doing their own CPTED with each other, is we engage in what's called capacity building. And often that involves creating nonprofits. Sometimes it creates what we now have developed into what's known as the Livability Academy. So let me give an example and show you what it looks like in real life. So this case study is from the city of Philadelphia, which is on the northeast part of the United States, just under New York City there. If you look at the top left map, Philadelphia is inland with a big river in the center of it. If you look at the second map here, you'll see that the river runs through the city, but right to the northeast of the city is this dot here, and that's our neighborhood that we did our project work in, and it's called the neighborhood of Fairhill and St. Hugh, also known as El Centro. And Kensington, sometimes called by that, is off to the side there. But essentially, it's a neighborhood, maybe a mile square, maybe 10, 20,000 people. It's quite a high density area with commercial streets, a lot of residential, multifamily townhomes, multifamily buildings, a lot of vacant properties. And if you want to know what the crime is like, the crime was over the top. It was, if you think of the TV show called The Wire, it was like that. Corners where drug dealers are running amok. And where there's hot spots where the police would always go to deal with crime. And this particular area was occupied by a large Hispanic population who were the victims of this kind of activity, and they were suffering as a result of that. So I was brought in, and our team was brought in about 6-7 years ago to start doing some CPTED training, and this is the story that unfolded after that. First thing we did was we did a crime analysis to look at the patterns of crime, the distribution of gangs, and where the shootings were and so forth. And one of the most interesting maps that I want to show you here today is the locations of drug dealing. And that area there, those are the drug dealing hotspots. And as you can see, this area was infected by serious problems. People were afraid to go outside because of so many drug dealing hotspots. And if you don't know what a drug dealing open air drug market looks like, it looks like that. That is essentially a surveillance photograph that I took of what it looks like just a regular intersection, a bike in the background, a couple of people sitting around, but they're dealing drugs, and that's how it works. And they're armed, and sometimes these corners of rival drug dealers get into arguments and shooting takes place, and that's how you get homicides. So this is the kinds of issues you're dealing with. The infrastructure in the area was a disaster. As you can see, garbage was strewn everywhere. There was a major transportation corridor with the railway that went through the center, but was littered with litter like this, and homeless were on either side. Really terrible problem. The infrastructure was falling apart. Sidewalks were a mess. People were afraid to walk outside, and it was a problem. So we used our model, our activation model. We started working with some nonprofits, and the nonprofit that made the biggest difference was a group called ICA, the Hispanic Association of Contractors and Enterprises. Now, this is a nonprofit organization that's absolutely outstanding. They were working with another national organization called the Local Initiative Support Corporation, or LISC. And together they got some funding and they got some training and they ran some workshops. And this is one of the later ones we did in 2018. We started in 2015-16, but this is one of the later ones we did, which was open to the community and open to the public, open to the residents, open to the police. They all came to hear about this message and hear about the training. And this particular one, Reclaiming Communities Through Engagement and Design Summit, was in 2018. And that's how we started our engagement process, was tapping into the regular activities of ASE through their food programs and their housing programs, because they're a tremendous organization led by Maria Gonzalez, who's the director there, Harry Tapia, and Stasia Montero, who are also safe growth advocates, who are some of the real drivers behind this kind of work. So that was the engagement step. And so what you do is you get people together, people who from the residents, people from the neighborhoods, people from the shops, some of the local beat cops, and there they are talking about what do we do and how do we plan it out? What are the main problems? And you work together as a group. They don't know exactly whether they're going to use CPTED, and they shouldn't. They're just getting started to put their heads together to talk the same language. And then ultimately at the end of the process, the ICA decided to put together a plan, a 10-year plan. And the plan would not just be for land use and resources and economic development, but would also have safety in it. And this was one of the first plans in America to adopt a safe growth strategy right directly within a long-term neighborhood plan. And it's a neighborhood plan, not for the city of Philadelphia, but just for the neighborhood. And within that, the groups and the professionals and the planners and the residents and the training all came together and said, how would we want our neighborhood to look? So they're doing it with each other. That's how you do engagement. And so of course they had some visions of what they thought it should look like. And there's some Clearfield Street housing that they wanted to change around. And there's a community center, a cultural center at the bottom, and some of the visions. And then the question was, okay, how do we go from where we are to where we're going to be, like a gap analysis? How do we bridge that gap? So they started with projects. They started by doing some fix-ups, some cleanups, some just painting projects of a bridge over one of the railway overpasses. And you know, it's not a big deal, but it's just a small win to get the residents to think that they have something under their belt. They can get some pride and get some self-esteem, and gives them the courage to go to the next level. And then you provide them with some CPTED skills and some CPTED training, and boom, they go to the next level. And then ultimately what we did was we created a long-term strategy called the Livability Academy. And ICA was the one that continues to run it. They've been running it for a number of years. It's a tremendously successful strategy. It's been more done virtually now because of COVID, but I think they're getting back to regular, where they bring residents from the community in. The residents go through this 8-week program where they come once a night or once every weekend, and they sit down, they learn about aspects of civic governance and about fundraising and about investment and about CPTED as part of the strategy. And they pick a project to work on. And each class does a different series of projects. And so eventually they start to pick up different things. And here's the one of the livability classes. There's the local police officers attend, and the students attend, and the residents attend, and they all work through getting to know each other. They develop a common language. And in the process of doing that, they put together some strategies. And here's one of the strategies they did along the railway line, where they had a lot of problems with homelessness. Is that it was in disarray, gave a terrible image to the place. And they decided to start to fundraise and to tackle that issue by, first of all, cleaning it up and just making it open so you can start to work with it. And then finally building a trail, the beginnings of a trail network throughout the city, so they can start to connect one part to another that they were all proud of. This area used to be called the Badlands, and gradually the residents, the community, the city, the CPTED practitioners, the police are all starting together to turn it around back from the brink. Here's some streetscaping they've done now to try to fix the area. And of course, ICA, because it's the social development housing program, is able to do housing for affordable housing for areas where they can't create affordable housing. And guess what? They've now created over 400 units of affordable housing, which does incorporate some CPTED strategies into it, like access controls and natural surveillance. But the key here, that it's all done with the community by engaging the residents themselves. So that's my story about engagement. And I'm going to turn my floor over to Rene to tell his story. So Rene, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Randy, very much. And this is another example of working, this is Rene Barent with Melem Architects based in the Portland office. And another example of a story where we're working with a school district and working on the renovation of a school, and how we actually were able to improve safety and security through the, improving safety security through the dialogue we had with the community and the input. Because it's all about education, is of course the foundation of a just society. And we want to touch today on the relationship between education and safety. Because research has shown that we all cannot learn if we don't feel safe. And many of our educational environments, as Jeremy shared as well, have been modified in ways or are not really providing a feeling of safety anymore. And we are trying with every school we design, with every project, we have a chance to repair that relationship. This is an example here of a school that started out actually quite nicely. In 1927, Grant High School was founded. And it was founded on a relationship with the city of Portland because it's sharing actually the property of a public park. which is great because in the US, many schools are actually used after hours or even during hours, sometimes by the public for events. They're definitely neighborhood centers. And it was really crucial to honor this relationship. There's a public pool, tennis courts, the football field is located on the public property. And as you see, it was a very open environment. What happened over the last 90 years, due to the expansion of the school, without considering any strategies about safety, security, or even community building, and certainly probably not the community input, the school was just added on to. And these are actually the numbers of years. This happened over 90 years. And what happened is all these red highlighted areas were created in which, again, similar like what Greg explained, was it's an unsupervisable area. There's no more control. The community had lost control. There was gang activity, vandalism, bullying, all sorts of unsavory things happened in these kind of red zones. And it also totally disconnected the school from the park, which was actually really beautiful. And you can see that even students walking between classes in these areas, because they had to go from science to the main building to arts to music, it really did not convey to them that they're being valued as persons. And certainly this is exactly where all the bad stuff between students happened. So again, how do we go around about it? When we are starting a school project, this is normally a 2-year design, in this case, a 2-year design process. And the first year is a lot of listening and engaging the community and reaching out to the community. That's the topic of today's conversation, of course. And so understanding what the community's vision was. And you see this graphic here, I think really brings back the two aspects of the community outreach. First is the engagement. And actually, we understand now, especially after the last year, that we have to take many more active steps to engage, make sure every voice really is heard. And because normally we always have the same people showing up at the meetings, we have the same people responding to the invitations, but really we're starting to make a bigger effort in the districts and making a bigger effort to reach everybody, really understand what the vision is. That goes from the school community over the staff, parents, and then we work with a design advisory group, which is basically a smaller body that actually is really directly involved in this decision making for the school, and that is formed by representatives from the other groups. And then, of course, the pyramid at the bottom shows from there on, the outreach happens because every one of these members is like an ambassador. So the community understands why certain design decisions were made and how they were made. And again, it's a long process, and they're really making sure that we are engaging the community, we're showing them options, we're listening to the community, we let them vote on things. And of course, the ultimate decisions always are with the district, who is actually finally the owner of the property. But it really has shown that how many amazing insights we have gained through this really active community engagement. And of course, the student's voice is also really critical. And showing then the result of all this is actually a building that hopefully will be more just in regard to the community, because you see here that removing all the kind of additions and buildings that have created the unsafe environment, really opening the school up to the park and really enjoying that public partnership with the parks and the school. The courtyards were previously like a no-go zone, or like also used for drug dealing probably after hours, are now active areas for students to use, hang out and lunch and socialize. So again, they're positive spaces now, no longer negative spaces. And even within, we learned a lot about listening to the community. In the US, we have a program in which we supplement students at a certain socioeconomic level with free meals, like Jeremy explained in Arlington. So there are free meals provided. However, the cafeteria in the old school was located in the basement. You have to go on these steep, scary-looking stairs here. And of course, nobody who had a chance not to eat here, that they went off-site and they ate at local, fast food chains, whatnot. So it was really created an example of this socio-economic shift in the school. And so making the lunch experience a positive and inviting experience. Now in the new building, we see that now the attendance of students, for lunch on site is actually much higher. And because it's a very fun place to be, and we have different seating options. And again, this was a direct result of listening to the community's voices. There was also concern about for example, the special needs students were located in the basement, while the honor students, occupied the top floors. literally a vertical hierarchy was created, and the floors were totally disconnected. So we, ripped out a lot of floor areas, floor slabs, and created these connections at many points throughout the school to make everybody aware on the second floor that there is actually first floor and the lower level, and vice versa. So you see, it's a totally different environment where students feel connected and engaged. One more interesting component during the design, there was in the US a large discussion about non-gender specific restrooms. And we had the clientele here, the principal at the school really took that to heart. And we developed for her what we call like the all user restrooms, in which all the areas which are normally unsafe and pose a security threat, like the hand washing areas, mostly that, is open now to circulation, much more open and engaged, while the actual stalls, which require actually a high degree of privacy, now have full height doors, their own ventilation system, and basically isolated rooms. So we're able now to accommodate all genders, of all students in this kind of really open environment, and the amount of vandalism and bullying and so has basically disappeared because there is no more kind of hidden area in the school for these activities. So I'm gonna give it back to Greg now to maybe, or to actually Macarena to manage our discussion.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Randy, Jeremy, Greg, and Renee for the interesting and well-presented case studies. We have some questions from the audience in our question and answer box. The first question is from Francesc Guillén. Hello, Francesc. Greetings to Catalonia. He asked to all, how do you manage when participants hold different and contradictory views or needs? Who wants to?
I'll take a shot at that. And while I'm doing that, Matei, I believe we have a poll question we want to ask our audience today. If you could put that poll question up, and as I'm answering that question, maybe the audience can answer the poll question. And I think it's interesting. So if you could just answer yes, no, or don't know during your practice of CPTED, have you ever been accused by anyone of employing CPTED in an exclusionary way? And responses are anonymous. So if you could answer that, please, if you wouldn't mind, while I'm just answering this. So the question is about how do you get different people with different views to participate? In a top-down strategy, that's very difficult, because if they're not engaged, they're not going to have a voice. So when we do CPTED using safe growth as a planning method, it's exactly the opposite. We engage them in the training so that we don't ever do a training just with planners or just with police. All our trainings are collaborative. So we have trainings with residents, with shop owners, with people from the city, students and police all together. And during the training itself, the residents learn how to speak to each other. They learn the same language. They learn the language of CPTED, the language of territorial control, language of access, the language of image and maintenance. They learn that language together and thereby start to learn how to speak to each other. And it's in the early, you saw our four-step model there. It's in that early, inclusionary, model, the steps of the model where people learn how to have that dialogue. So by the time they get to project planning, their voices are being heard all over the place because they know these people by name. So for us, it's not a difficult thing. So does anybody else want to answer that question?
Yeah, I could say, because sometimes in our engagement with the community, when it's about a more specific topic like the design of a new school, we have people coming, of course, with all sorts of viewpoints, and again, we actually encourage that, because we don't want to actually prioritize right from the beginning. We just want everything out there on the table. And then we have a couple of tools we use, and one of them is actually a prioritization. When we actually, or we let people vote on certain topics, so if there's a certain aspect in regard to the design or safety security, we just gather and we understand from the group, are there 2 people who really strongly feeling, about this topic, or is it like 25, or is it everybody basically? And that sometimes these discussions then will be very helpful to put a kind of perspective on the different varying viewpoints. Yeah.
We have more question and answers. Here, this is for Randy. Randy, we are having problems in Ohio. Our building codes don't allow for the signage needed gender-neutral bathrooms in school. Do you have something to say, Randy?
Well, I can share that in Florida, our beloved Republican governor has just passed the law that trans people cannot participate in women's athletic sports. And that was a pushback to the Obama years where you could have, gender neutral bathrooms. I think that Renee gave a great example of being able to provide an architectural solution to male, females, and everything else in between, or whatever it is you choose, or whatever is the correct language on that. And I think there are design solutions because, for example, handicap bathrooms are gender neutral, right? I mean, we know that to be as part of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and that's nationwide. There is not male handicap bathrooms or female, it's an ADA bathroom. So there's nothing, if you go about it cleverly or creatively, I think that you can design gender neutral bathrooms. For example, family bathrooms are gender neutral. Handicap bathrooms are gender neutral. And now we're seeing in a school environment, which is especially sensitive to, we just had an incident in a high school here just recently where a 13-year-old trans got bullied and beat up and was all captured on iPhones and publicized, and the bullying that's going on. So I think that we can be done in a neutral manner that supports architecture and supports observation and surveillance and supervision being the key word. And I think Renee's example was a great example of how to architecturally work around the minefield of political narrow-mindedness.
And our biggest challenge was actually the local building codes, because again, the fixture count, the codes are not up to date yet, because how they count fixtures is actually still by gender. Mm-hmm. And we had to work creatively with the city of Portland here in the building department to find an acceptable way how we count and overall have the number of fixtures required by code. That was actually the biggest challenge, apart from the other, cultural challenges.
And I will just share as a follow-up to that related to code clearance and certificates of occupancies, we've been having gender neutral bathrooms in our nightclub world here in South Florida for at least 15 or 20 years. In fact, I can remember some of the nightclubs I used to go to where it was, you had a male side and a female side, and then you had the washroom area in the middle, and they had sort of like mirrors that you could sort of see in the wash areas, but not into the private. I mean, so that was sort of a design feature. Like, wow, if you checked out the bathrooms, it became sort of an attractive feature of the nightclub, was how safe and clean the bathrooms became, and yet the element of intrigue because you could sort of see a little bit of what was going on the other side.
Mm-hmm. Here is another very, very interesting question from Sandra Milton in our box. The local shelter is building an 8-story building, main floor drop-in center for all, second floor sub kitchen, the other 6 are micro units for indigenous women next to a safe injection site and shelter. In an area that is unsafe, drug dealers and prostitution and other safety issues, gangs and guns. How can we oppose this from a accepted point of view? What do you think, Jeremy?
Yeah, this just sounds like a very challenging situation. I think, one of the things right off the bat is, again, we're talking about engagement, and that is to try and get the community engaged in the conversation about what's happening in the community, what the problems are, what's being proposed, and how the activity that's happening in that community may affect, the positive outcomes of that proposed development. I think it's important that with the inclusion, and we're talking about including everyone in this conversation, not just the developers and the law enforcement, but the community members, getting them involved, getting them to help make decisions, help educate them about what's right for their community. They're the native experts. They're the ones who know their community, the business owners, the neighbors, the people who live in that area. So I think it's really important to get that engagement instilled in the conversation. And then from there, they can figure out, okay, what are the next steps going forward? How can we make this a safe place? And if it's not the right area, where can they make that area or make that development safe for them?
Do you want to add something, Greg?
No, I think that was a good answer. I'll let that go.
Perfect.
I think Randy has his hand up.
Please, Randy, please, Randy.
I've had the opportunity of working on several homeless shelters here in South Florida, the Camillus House, Broward's Coalition for the Homeless, and they face this challenge about we need to provide a safe place for people who are on the streets and not by choice. And how do we provide them, with healthcare, food, a bed to sleep? But there are ground rules that have to be administered for the safety of all, which is, no guns, no drugs, no sex or rock and roll, that kind of thing. So that becomes under the operational aspects of CPTED, of management practices as a private business. You have the right to have people to walk through a weapons screening station as everyone comes in or out. Oh, you're carrying a knife? Check it at the door. You have drugs? Keep it outside. If you're found to be, using drugs or high or drinking or assaulting other people, you lose privileges, you're kicked out of the facility. So a lot of, I think, what this question was asking was, how do I wrestle with this incongruence of wanting to provide services for people who are disenfranchised and need help? On the other hand, it can't allow prostitution or weapons being brought in or assaults to occur or open drug sales. No, that's not going to happen under my roof, because then I'll lose my license. Or I just got a case that came in where someone got assaulted at one of these care facilities and now they're suing the facility. So I think that management plays a big role in determining what the ground rules are. And that, of course, is a basic component of CPTED.
I could add to that too. This exclusion inclusion dichotomy is not an easy balance. There are certain cases, and Jeremy, you worked in a school shooting situation, a tragedy massacre in Portland after it happened, and you had to contend with this. How do you do? And we're developing a school CPTED guidebook in the ICA to try to talk about this. But this is never an easy balance. I mean, the question that Randy raises is, if you have these threats, if you don't create some security, what happens? Eyes on the street don't always work. No one strategy works all the time. It's a question of how you do the analysis. From my point of view, when we do the safeguard programming, the answer is usually always the same. The answer is we get as many people engaged in the planning, in the research, and the project writing first. And we as the planners, architects and planners, we don't do it for them. We don't come in and say, here's a report, here you go. We do the opposite. We say, let's work together. Here's what a report looks like. Let's teach you how to write a report and write your own report. And then you make the choices about how much to exclude, how much not to exclude. Now, you can still run into troubles that this neighborhood wants to exclude that neighborhood. And one of the guidelines as a CPTED practitioner we have in the International CPTED Association certification program is that you have to act ethically and balance those nearby neighborhoods. So certification in the ICA is one of the keys to making sure that the exclusion question is done properly.
Very interesting, Greg. And we have also some very nice comments in our question and answer box. For example, from Gary Sigris, the example used by Renee was great and client has a similar design. So thank you, Gary, for your comments. And here we have another question for all. How to apply CPTED in communities that have lost faith in their local authorities and increase the engagement process? That's a good question also. Please, who wants to respond?
I can just briefly add that we use authorities in our project all the time, but we don't, they come to the community. The thing is that they're there. When police, for example, drive by in a car and you never see them, they never get out, they never interact, they never learn the name of the residents, the residents never learn of the cops. Of course, you're going to have these breakdowns. That is a flaw in police delivery strategies. It's a flaw in police leadership to not engage in community policing. This shift away from community policing to militarization of policing is a disaster. No wonder there's a Black Lives Matter movement in this country. I don't blame them. Of course they're angry. Why wouldn't they be angry? What we do in our safeguard program is we do the opposite. We get the residents and the communities and the police to work together right at the start. And you gradually break down these barriers. It's not easy. The work in Philadelphia wasn't easy. It took many years. The work in New York took a lot of time. And you do one person at a time. The answer is one person at a time. That's how we do it. Anyway.
Very good answer. Someone else? Do you want to add something to that question? Renee or Jeremy or Randy? No? No. Here we have more questions. The audience is very active. Here is one from Patrick Noble. Are there any jurisdictions that any of you know of where developers must pay or donate some part of the application process into the promotion and application of CPTED?
Try answering that one. So yeah, this is Jeremy Rear. So the city of Portland here, where Renee and I live, they have a the planning department, planning and development department has a requirement for low-income housing to establish a CPTED assessment and plan and strategies. It's the, if I remember correctly, the requirements are a little bit vague, but the introduction of the CPTED process needs to be part of the design and development process. So I haven't partaken in that in this city, in this jurisdiction as of yet, but I would assume at this point that if a developer or someone who is building new low-income housing, they would need to connect with the city planning department and start that process. So City of Portland has something started. There might be other jurisdictions out there, Greg, you might know of. But not for pay though. I think the question was where they have to pay to get this done. I mean, I can tell you in Canada back in the day, we had a meeting with the CMHC, the Government Housing Authority, and the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and a number of researchers from Simon Fraser University. We sat down with them in a consulting situation, said, how do we do that? How do we create a required development permit process? And we were shut right down by the development industry. They said they would not pay the extra fees. And I know there are many communities that have development requirements. Toronto, Peel Region, Saskatoon does a lot of this, and British Columbia does a lot of this, but it's not paid. It's not requiring the developers to pay. And I'd love to see it happen. I doubt very much whether you're going to politically get that past City Council. Randy, you have experience with that?
Oh, first, let me acknowledge that Patrick Nobles is one of the key lead person of the CPTED reviewers for the city of Pompano Beach. So welcome, Patrick, and the other members of Pompano Beach and South Florida. Thank you for joining in. You know, the challenge that we faced there are probably a dozen different communities in Florida that have CPTED resolutions or ordinances, but none of it's a pay-to-play opportunity. Sarasota, St. Pete, Tampa, Jacksonville, Boca Raton, obviously Pompano Beach. Fort Lauderdale has a CPTED ordinance that none of the political people even know about. I mean, they're building a new convention center here and a convention center hotel right next to the Port of Lauderdale, you know, Port Everglades, and they don't even have a security person as part of that new development. Which just boggles my mind. So the challenge here is how do we get, sort of self-funding improvement for security and neighborhood planning, and other than Pompano Beach's gentle coercion of asking people to submit a public safety plan, I really don't know of any place else that requires payment or a fee like you would a development fee or other areas that we have for wetlands or things of that nature. I'm not familiar with where else people would be doing that.
And I may just add, I mean, sometimes I think it could be more indirectly where, for example, the city of Portland requires every new development, you have to have a retail face at the sidewalk, so instantly there's this eyes on the street is embedded. You can't just like say, okay, the first levels are just all parking and, then the units are on top or something like this. So I think there are indirect ways, because CPTED also, we have all these passive strategies that make the city safer. And some of these, I think in many cities maybe are embedded into the code already, so to actually help and support a safer sidewalk experience in many ways. Yeah.
Here we have another very nice comment from Amelia Price. Mr. Saville, it is a blessing to see you and join this Zoom. I have been keeping in contact with Melissa Kim. I don't know if she updated you on our progress. I will send you an email, and great CPTED training. That's a very good comment for you, Greg.
Thank you very much.
and
nice.
here is also a question for you, I think, Greg, and for all the panelists. What is the role of third generation CPTED in community cohesion and engagement?
Right. So third generation is a recent invention. Only we announced it at the conference in Mexico 2 or 3 years ago, just before COVID. Matea Mejiñachu is behind the scenes there somewhere. I can't see her, but I know she's there. Her and I wrote this article about third generation CPTED, and what it is, it's the next evolution of what should happen from looking at the physical environment and realizing that's only the first step, and then look into the social environment and social CPTED or second generation CPTED, and saying here's how you get people to care about looking for each other, and then to the next one, which is what about the quality of life? You can still have good access controls, and you can still have fixed working together, but it still won't be necessarily a great neighborhood to live or where people want to live, or they can still have fears. How do you move to the higher levels of quality of life? And that's based on Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And what we realized was there were neighborhoods that were doing high level things in their neighborhood that were helping people really fulfill their own personal needs through culture and music and art and so forth, and helping others to help others. Those kinds of strategies, which are both political, social, and environmental. And those are relatively new, and it's a new field. We're still developing some of these ideas. But we're currently documenting some case studies on where we think third generation ideas are evolving. And I think of some of the schools that you heard from Jeremy and Rene, when you have schools that are not just doing learning and not just doing playground recreational stuff, but are doing some of the emotional things, some of the meditative things that give back to the community, kids working in the community to give back to the community, things like that start to approach what we're talking about in third generation CPTED. So I'm sorry I can't give you more case studies. We're just getting started in the field.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the response, Greg. Here is one from Cyril de la Fuente. Thank you, Cyril, for your question. In the Philippines, we have gender-sensitive comfort room like CRS for LGBTQ members. These are even integrated in the school-based management, sanitation, and hygiene program implemented by the Department of Education. Sorry, it wasn't a question, it was a comment. So thank you for that, Cyril de la Fuente. Here we have another question for you, panelists. How can CPTED support the cohesion and engagement of an immigrant community and ensure safety in the USA?
Well,
yes.
if I understand the question, I mean, while we see on the news every day that most of the immigration challenges right now are on the border of New Mexico and California and Arizona with Mexico, here in South Florida, we get all the immigrants, that come by water from Cuba, Haiti, DR, all that kind of stuff. And right now we're getting swamped with makeshift boats from Cuba that are Cubans that are coming back in, except they were given special status, whereas the Haitians were told no, and they send them back. And now we're sending, of course, the Cubans back to Cuba. So it's a very difficult situation, especially when you look at what's happening on our border and the southwest border, where they're separating families, they're holding children, they're breaking up families. And yet every night on the news, they're showing this. And yet the director of Homeland Security saying the border is closed. And yet there's videos of them, of people coming across with rafts and walking and risking their lives to come across. At some point, part of this is policy about what is the experience you're looking for. Do you want to allow people to come in? And if so, how are they screened and qualified to make sure they're not a terrorist group or containing, have hepatitis or TB or COVID or whatever it might be. So there's medical issues, there's public safety issues, there's public health issues, there's crowding issues, and there's having an equity issues that everyone gets on the same playing field, whether you're applying for immigration from Sweden or the Philippines or from Mexico or from Haiti or from Cuba. There needs to be an immigration policy, and that, of course, has not been able to pass Congress ever. And that's why we're in the mess we're in. Where does CPTED fall in is now once you are putting people in, housing them, how are they providing it in a safe manner with natural supervision, with mechanical surveillance, the food experience, the health experience, so that you don't have contamination for public health issues. I mean, people are coming in from Mexico are not being screened for COVID. What? I mean, are you kidding? So here we've done this extraordinary effort to vaccinate our country, except for the people who are hardheads and don't want to be vaccinated. And now we have an open back door that letting people come in that we don't know if they're vaccinated or they're not vaccinated, or we don't know if they're carrying viruses or not. So there's a lot of very hard political choices that are way above our pay grade as CPTED practitioners, in my opinion.
But it all goes back to what Greg said. I think we're trying to, make a safer community for all people. So it really doesn't really matter even because, I mean, actually, when it comes to the design of schools, what we learned, we have to use different strategies to meet different people, So the African-American community responds differently than maybe the Hispanic Latinx community, or maybe the whatever, American Irish community. So we have to really change the tools and change our approach to make sure we listen to all the voices, because again, it's about neighborhood building and bring everybody together. And the good news, I always think, when I listen to the news, it also sounds like a disaster. In reality, actually, I think it works very well in the US. I'm from Germany, I'm from Europe, and I must say it's actually very, how so many people from so many different backgrounds working together, and we see them working positively together. And actually, again, on a human point, it actually works very well. And again, CPTED is there to really facilitate this cohesion and the engagement of all people.
I would second that. I think you're right, Jeremy, or Renee, but I also think that some of the points Randy makes are pretty large-scale policy issues, which really aren't a CPTED question. I mean, CPTED was created to create safer neighborhoods in New York in the 1970s. It never considered the larger international global immigration issues. So I think we have to be careful about how far we take the model. But having said that, I can tell you right now, many of the communities we worked in Toronto, for example, in San Romano way back in 2000, in Philadelphia, with the examples I just gave, those are immigrant communities, and those folks are participating in the training. We did a training in Ottawa, Canada 3 years ago. We have all kinds of immigrants part of the training. Now, we did have to provide translators. We did have to help them, get out there and make sure that they were not uncomfortable with police, because they come from countries in which the police are terrorists, and so forth. So you have to take steps to make sure that happens. But again, this business about not doing 2 or 4, but doing with them, that applies across the board. We're already working with immigrants, and they're already a tremendous positive contribution to neighborhood safety. So,
very, very interesting thoughts, panelists. And I want to highlight the idea we are designing safety communities for all, because this is very connected with the ICA mission and vision. So thank you for that. We have here another very interesting question from Carlos Gutierrez, ICA director from South America. He is asking, hi, what would you say is the most important CPTED contribution in this time of uncertainty? What do you want to say, please?
I think the aspect of focusing on safety, because there's a lot of, everything is in flux right now, and the police is under threat and all this. And I think bringing us all back to communities which are safer and really allow us to bring the communities back, especially after COVID. Many cities have become these no man's lands where really anarchist rule, and it looks, the image is threatening and of fear, and so again, CPTED I think can help with the strategies, especially the passive strategies, just like Greg showed in Philadelphia, to really fix up the environment. We have to repair. I mean, I don't want to go downtown Portland. It looks like a war zone. Really burned out buildings and whatever. I mean, we have to actually, CPTED was never more important than now. I think to really start rebuilding trust in our urban fabrics again, start bringing people back, because the people don't even want to go back. But why would anybody go back? They're all used to going to the mall now. Businesses are used to not being there because they were, threatened and burned out and whatnot, vandalized. So again, I think we can play a big role in, bringing back the trust and really repairing the environment. It's like really, I think we're like New York in the 70s. It's like there had to be a lot that had to be done to make the city livable again, and for people actually want to spend like $20 million for an apartment there.
Let me segue from Renee there. My opinion is that the most significant contribution that CPTED can be made for our present conditions in America and around the world is what Greg Seville taught me when I would team teach with him, which is about collaborative teaching method. It's about the collaboration of, as you heard him speak about getting the input from different groups. Now, at some point, you have to decide what is the highest good, and it may not, and someone may not be happy with that result. But I think by asking your input and by trying to find reasonable compromises that address public safety, public health, which is now a major design consideration that we not really didn't think much about, 2 years ago, that we find out about the people who are the legitimate users and what are they legitimately using that property for, or that park, or that border, or that school, or whatever it might, or that mall, and then find out by asking the input, by doing the design charrettes, by having the community meetings, by doing the polls, by asking people, what do you want? And having someone listen. And then someone, unfortunately, has to make a decision. What is affordable? What is doable? What's achievable?
Mhm.
And
Completely
I can-
agree.
I can add one
Sorry.
more. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I agree with both Renee and Randy about the collaboration and especially the community building. We need to learn how to talk to each other again,
Civilly.
civilly, and some of the things that we're doing, Renee and I are doing in our work is we're engaging people with what we call a community agreement, and that's probably many people might know about those, but it kind of establishes kind of the game rules, if you will, before you even start talking, and details like not interrupting people while they're talking. That's just one of the game rules. Is it let people finish talking about what they need to say before you have your own opinion. So establishing some structure to these conversations is very important, especially now when people are so polarized with what's going on politically and socially. Yeah. Let me add to that to my panelists, because I know this is we'll probably end off on this point. We wanted to have a look at the results of that poll earlier too, but I wanted to add this. I wrote something for an upcoming article I'm putting. I want to just read it to you because I think it addresses some of what we're talking about now. Can CPTED be used exclusionary way? Yes, it can. You can exclude people, exclude different ethnic groups, exclude certain poverty levels. Yes, it can. We've been trying to give you examples of how we didn't do that. But if you're not certified and you don't know how to do this properly, you run the risk of doing this. But here's what I wrote about this. Sadly, some political activists within the architectural and urban design professionals have chosen to weaponize CPTED as a tool for their own political ends. They are using an evidence-free argument to distort the CPTED methodology by calling CPTED spatial anti-Blackness and a tool of exclusion. I suppose it's only inevitable in a country with such highly charged political polarities. There are those on each side of the political divide who will distort or misunderstand CPTED. With this webinar, we want to show how you can do it properly. There's no time where CPTED has been more useful by use of everyone to use it together as a inclusionary community building tool. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, for goodness sakes. Let's wake up and get over our political correctness and start to see that CPTED is one of the answers that are right at our doorstep.
And here the audience is very, very happy with your presentation. Here we have a comment from Simon Oyesikun from Nigeria. He says, Nigeria needs these panelists to help in distinction the solution to Nigeria insecurity. Looking forward to having you guys. So a very, very nice comment. Here we have
look at the poll,
sorry.
Maka. We look at the poll results about how many people in this webinar have been faced with exclusionary comments.
Oh, I don't know where is the poll. Probably Mateja can help me with that.
It's up now?
Yeah,
it's up now, yeah.
Yeah, it's up now.
80% basically.
79, almost 80% of people have never had anyone excuse them of any CPTED exclusionary strategies, and 60% don't know, and only 4% say that they have. Now, 4% isn't zero, but it certainly isn't a condemnation of CPTED. So the evidence, at least from this very selective group, sort of tells us that it's not being used that exclusionary that often. It is, and we need to be mindful of it, but let's not blow this out of proportion.
Yeah, because the problem is the some voices get a much bigger audience, or megaphone. That is our current situation everywhere, I guess. Yeah.
That's true. That's true. Here we have another question, probably for you, Greg. How is safe growth combined with CPTED? Can you explain that with further details, Greg?
Yeah,
to enhance
absolutely.
social cohesion and community engagement. That's the
Right.
question.
So CPTED is a set of strategies. The designer, the practitioner looks at a place, analyzes it, and says, let's try surveillance, let's try natural surveillance, let's try access control, let's try territorial controls, let's use architecture. There's strategies. You don't know who's going to deliver it. You don't know who's going to do the analysis. You just have some strategies that are part of your toolbox. Second generation CPTED is exactly the same. You have strategies to bring people together, to create community cohesion, to get cultural events to help them do this. Again, just a set of strategies. Safe growth is not a set of strategies. Safe growth is a neighborhood planning system. It's a way to plan neighborhoods safely. And it's a way to get people to work together inclusively in small teams, using these livability academies, and then to bring CPTED in later. So we use CPTED, but only as a way to build community cohesion, only as a way to plan the neighborhood. So when the city has a plan that says, here's our plan for the future in land use, here's our plan for economic development, it very seldom talks about individual neighborhoods and how each individual neighborhood would have a plan and how each of those plans connect together. I would encourage you to take a look at the ASE, the HASE, the Hispanic Association of Contractors and Enterprises in Philadelphia, the examples I gave you, and talk to some of the folks in that organization, because they have a beautiful neighborhood plan. And if we could replicate that across the whole city in the future, we would have a new kind of city.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Greg, for that very detailed explanation. Here we have a question for all the panelists from Wendy Sarkisian. I had like to ask how the practitioners learn about community engagement. What sources do you use? What models do you work aligned with? Where do you think the cutting edge of CE in CPTED is today and into the future? Who wants to respond?
I've already talked too much, so I'll leave my panelists.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we are, because we're always looking for new ways to engage, and so, but yeah, we have not found like the one source for all these yet. But I mean, many are really passed down. We're learning from each other. You know, we're talking to other colleagues and friends, and like, okay, and we learn about new strategies, because again, it's an evolving field, and we all know we have to do much better, because we have to be much more active, because we still realize, especially after the last year, we don't listen to the really quiet voices or the voices who don't show up, you know. So we have to get out there, and we have to be much more active, and working actually with leaders in certain communities and certain neighborhoods, and ask them what actually would appeal to you. What strategy would do you think would be appropriate for your community? Because many times we don't even know. So I wish there was this one. We should start. I mean, we have a list now internally, and I think maybe we're sharing it with architectural design colleagues. I wish there was like this. Maybe at ICA, we're creating a toolbox, you know, where we're actually dumping all these ideas. That this worked well. We can have case studies. That's another guidebook idea here.
Probably you can announce that more in detail, because it's a very nice product. Please announce it a little.
Randy.
What I heard Wendy's question, hi Wendy, glad you're here and participating. I heard the question asking a different way, which again is a great example of, you know, we hear the words coming out of people's mouths and not everyone hears it the same way. They listen, but they may not hear it, or they may not understand it. What I heard Wendy's question was, where do I go to find out, you know, what the latest cutting edge of information is on things that we use in CPTED? For example, homeless issues are a big concern, and you know, how do we inspire and motivate affordable workforce housing, for example, which is a big consideration, because if people have a place to live where they can afford, then they're not going to be kicked out of their place because they can't afford an apartment or mortgage or whatever might issue. So affordable housing is a really big issue that's an undercurrent and underlying factor in crime, homelessness, quality of life, all the environmental conditions in our cities. So I think the answer to the question is that at our annual conferences, we're hearing presentations from Europe. I mean, there was just an article sent to us as the board from Sweden the other day about how they're doing affordable housing. That was, you know, I didn't know about that. I'm not Swedish, I'm Miamian, you know, so, but even though it's a very heterogeneous community, you know, and small, you know, by our standards in the United States, they had some good ideas. So I think by sharing of the information at our mother organization and at the conferences and providing access to those resources in like a community library so people can look up topics of how do I deal with a needle share park or affordable housing, or what is the standards of care for developing a city park these days for children? I mean, there's lots of those kind of issues. I think that what I heard is Wendy's question is, where do I find this information, and really what is cutting edge? I'm hoping that those resources and those questions and that information is being funneled to our organization of ICA and our wonderful executive director, who has the task of organizing it and putting it where it needs to be so people can find stuff.
And by the way, I'll just add to this, is in terms of the strategies that are used in community engagement, in Safe Growth actually is a community engagement model. We use it, we base it on some of the early work of Reginald Revans, who created action-based learning, and also Eric Trist, who created action-based research. That's our history is that. We also tap into other CE models, such as the work of Jim Ruff in Port Townsend, Washington, who uses something called wisdom councils. So we do that strategy. And I'll also kudos out to Wendy, because she's written a lot of stuff on community participation, has written her kitchen sustainability books over the years about engagement. So there's a lot of models out there. But I think what we got to remember is when we do CPTED, when we do Safe Growth, we get people at the table. And we have a panel of 4 of us, they're all males, we're all white. Well, that's because CPTED USA only has 4 people. That's why we're doing the webinar, to reach out to the community. Luckily we have Mackie here to save us. But you need to have people at the table from different walks of life in order to do engagement. If you don't have them at the table, and unfortunately, CPTED training, particularly in the United States, it completely misses this story. Not so much with the people on this panel, but it misses the story. CPTED training and policing, well, first of all, they rarely do CPTED training and policing. If they do it at all, it's usually a couple of PowerPoint slides. But it's got to re-engage with how you build communities. If it doesn't do that, then we're going to have exclusionary practices all over the place. And so that's what we're doing in the ICA. We're fighting that trend, and we're building a body of knowledge to do better in the future.
Here we have another very interesting question that is very connected with the COVID crisis. In times of COVID, the community locked up without the possibility of meeting in the public space in many countries. How can we get them back together and promote engagement and mental health through the use of CPTED?
I'll start on that one, and then hope you guys can segue. We just did a wonderful presentation for the Resort Hospitality Institute, RHI, and the focus of the presentation with some of the ICA board members was, abundance versus abandonment, and the fact that many cities in the West Coast are abandoned because of what happened with COVID, and there are some cities and Republican states that are abundant because they just didn't, they just chose not to participate in common sense or science, and they just said, screw it, we're open. South Florida being one of that. And so when you look about how is it that Florida is now well ahead of the curve on this, is because the schools are open, the nightclubs are open, the restaurants are open. They are still aggressively pushing vaccination and information and science. But if you choose to take the risk, that's your choice as a human being. We can only lead a horse so far to water, but you can't make it drink. I think the answer to the question is that if we create activities, legitimate activities that are exciting, concerts. We're seeing right now that at our the Indy 500 just happened this weekend, and they're giving vaccinations at the Indy 500. They had 150,000 people there. There was a baseball game in New York that they're giving vaccinations right there at the Yankees game. Okay, the president today is talking about if you get a vaccination, we'll give you a beer. Okay, whatever. So I think part of it is just getting clever and creative, which is what CPTED is famous for, about coming up with untraditional solutions to create some excitement and some hype to get people to participate. Does that make sense?
Completely. Any other response? No? Unfortunately, we are coming to the end of the webinar. It's very sad because we have so many active questions from the audience. Thank you so much for your nice comments. We are very happy to have you online. And thank you very much, dear USA ICA directors and CPTED experts, for your interesting contributions in this webinar. I also appreciate the attendance of the audience, and I hope to have you in our future ICA webinars. Back to you, Mateja, for the closing.
Thank you very much, Macarena, and thank you so much to our panelists today for this very interesting webinar. Obviously, we went over time, but I think it was worth it. So I would just like to leave you and close this webinar with just a couple of short announcements. I will just share my screen here. I invited you at the start to please join us if you're not yet a member. You will receive benefits as a member, as well as announcements and so on, and anyone can join. Membership is open to anyone. Also, you may be interested in our individual certification program for CPTED practitioners. So make sure to have a look at that. And also our course accreditation program that we have for our course developers and CPTED instructors. So please contact us if you'd like more information about that as well. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media. We're on all the major platforms, including YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So this is all for today. Thank you very much again for joining us today. I will also leave you with a short promo video of the ICA. Make sure to be safe, take care, and we will see you next time. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.